In 2010, Connie Conway was elected as the first woman to serve as the GOP Assembly leader in almost 30 years. And while Republicans are outnumbered almost 2-1 by Democrats in the state Assembly, she has nevertheless kept Assembly Republicans relevant in the legislative process by challenging assumptions of the majority party and, from time to time, finding common ground with Democratic Governor Jerry Brown on restraining state spending by, as she has said, helping the governor, quote, channel his inner Republican, unquote. As she leaves the Assembly due to term limits, we sit down and ask her about her thoughts on the legislative process, the challenges facing California, and the future of the California Republican Party. California Retrospective, a conversation with Assembly Minority Leader Connie Conway.
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from Paramount Agricultural Companies, growing healthy food for you and your family.
From the California Channel at the state capitol, Valley PBS, and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. Having been a county supervisor and president of the California State Association of Counties, or CSAC, prior to joining the legislature, our guest, Connie Conway, the Assembly Minority Leader, has a unique position to discuss the changing relationship between state and local governments. We're delighted to have her back on the Maddy Report.
Thanks.
Welcome.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, let's start a little bit with how you got involved in politics. You started a little later than most politicians.
I started a lot later than most politicians.
Why?
Well, it wasn't something that I ever studied or thought about, but actually I think what drove me to politics was my father. After a full career with the phone company, he was ready to retire. There was an opening on the Tulare County Board of Supervisors, so he ran and was successful. Unfortunately, in the middle of his third term, at the very young age of 65, we lost him to cancer. So it was 10 years after that, and folks just said, hey, the other guy's going to run. We're not sure how we feel about him. And then part of my life is guilt. They said, you can't let him have your father's seat.
It's in your blood.
Well, and I was almost a reluctant candidate. I think I filed on the last day at the last minute, but...
well, let me ask you this. So you were on the Board of Supervisors for a period of time, and then you became president of CSAC, which represents 58 counties in California. Do you think that helped prepare you for your eventual election to the legislature in 2008?
Oh, definitely, and I think it was really one of the reasons why I ended up doing it. I love the Board of Supervisors. They say all politics is local, but local really is great. I mean, you have direct contact with your constituents. The issues are there. There's 5 of you, and a decision has to be made. It's not a lot of hearings and committees. It's just like, okay, guys, even when the vote's 3-2, the 3 will out, and we move forward, and we get something done for our constituents. So I love that, but it was actually, that was part of it, because what I saw in the chairs, going through the chairs at CSAC and then being president, was I call it the intimate relationship between state and, in particular, county government, and what a mess it was, because the state is very free to mandate programs, and you will do this, throw it down on the counties, and then say, oh, by the way, we're not paying for it.
Yeah, the unfunded mandate.
That's right, exactly.
So you then move into the legislature, and within 2 years, you're named head of the Republicans. So you're now the Assembly Minority Leader. What do you see as and you've held that position longer than anyone in the term limits era, which is pretty amazing. So what do you see as your key role as the Assembly Minority Leader?
Well, when I first became Minority Leader, one of the reporters said to me, how does it feel to be the leader of the irrelevant caucus? And I said, I have a sense of humor, sort of. But I said to him, look, I'm not irrelevant to the people that sent me here, and I'm not irrelevant to my one and only special interest group, and that's the taxpayers in California. So you can call us whatever we want, but I see my role as a voice, not only for my constituents, but for Californians that, as I always say, all honor, praise, and glory to the taxpayers. They get up every day, they go to work, they pay their taxes, they take care of their family, they worship at their place of choice, they give to charity, they volunteer, and they don't have a lot of time for political spin. I think that's why most people are kind of arm's length to it, and I'd like to bring people closer to that, make sure I'm representing the views of average Joe.
Well, talking about taxpayers, we've got this new rainy day fund that they want to change. What are your thoughts about this rainy day fund proposal?
It's been out there for a long time. We kept putting it off. So a rainy day fund proposal, obviously, is something that Republicans or even conservative Democrats have been, asking for a long time. And I think the compromise that we've reached, the initiative that was going to be on the ballot, we just all voted for that. I mean, the piece of legislation, just to have something. But now we've kind of worked together. I'm not saying nothing's perfect, but this is better. And actually, we fought long and hard as Republicans to get some key pieces in there. We didn't want it to be so easily to sweep it. Oh, we've got a rainy day fund. Oh, but if it's an emergency, we can take it. So we think the terms that we negotiated are pretty good, and God bless the governor. I think he was there for it, so we're good with it.
You know, it seems every time we talk about the state budget, one of the issues that always comes up is the volatility of revenue. So I'm not going to get into our taxes too high or too low debate, but rather how the state gets revenue. Should we be thinking of other sources that are more stable? And if so, what are they?
That's always a discussion, and in fact, I had the same conversation with Governor Brown when he first got here. We need more revenue, Connie, we need more revenue. And I said, you know, I think what we need, first of all, is to tell people the truth about what the actual revenue is and what we're doing with it. I think that would be important. But secondly, if I were to agree that we need more revenue, here's where we kind of differ in opinion. You know, there's on your side, Governor, you'd like the people that are paying to pay more. We just want to create more taxpayers. If you really need revenue, let's let people work. Let's get off the back of business, free up some of the regulation. I think we're pretty safe now. I think we've maybe overstepped, but let's let people get back to work, and they will gladly do that. I really believe most people want to be part of the community. They just want to work.
Okay, well, when we come back, we're going to talk about the legislative process, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Great conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with State Assembly member Connie Conway, the first woman to serve as GOP Assembly leader since 1981. Well, every year the legislature seems like they're dealing with hundreds of bills. Should there be a limit in the number of bills that the legislature considers in one year?
Oh, you're singing my song. Yes. I mean, I know there's been movements for part-time legislature. You know, my thought on that is even one day a year, we can put 2,500 really bad bills on a consent calendar and pass them. So I really like the idea of limiting the bills, not in a punishment sort of way. I think that because there's so many, I mean, there's 120 of us, everybody gets 40, plus committees, plus if you're large and in charge, you can do whatever you want. And it's you know, it's an expectation. You can run up to 40. I think they just hear 40. In my mind, if we limited that, maybe we could really focus. You know, because oftentimes there's probably 10 bills that are exactly the same. There's no coordination. People put them across the desk. It costs between $10,000 and $20,000, I've heard, just to get a bill across the desk. Smaller amounts of legislation, but more focused on the big issues that are important to people, and the legislators should be spending more time not only talking to their constituents, but to each other. We should be solving the problems of education, of budget, whatever it is, in a more thorough way.
It might be that the glory of being able to have a bill passed is it captures legislators sometimes. What about putting sunset provisions on laws? You know, trying them out for a while, seeing if they work, and either changing them, modifying them, or removing them.
You know, I think that's just another tool that would be a good idea. I think what I found, I did have a couple of bills that ended up being pilots, one out in Inyo County that I represent, but it's going to, the pilot's going to expire probably before we even get it started. But there's got to be middle ground where you could figure those things out, and I think it makes sense because most constituents say for every bill you pass, take 2 away. So sunsetting
it's like closing your closet.
It would be a great idea.
So you've been in the legislature for a while. What bills are you most proud of?
Well, as leader, I've tried actually not to have a huge bill package, rather work with our policy people and help our members find areas of expertise or bills that they want to run. But I think some of the education pieces have been really important to me. I feel like jobs in the economy is #1 in every poll when you ask people what's important. And for me, education, jobs in the economy are chicken and egg stuff. You know, what's first? Do you have a good economy that's creating jobs but not an educated workforce, or do you pump up the educated workforce and then there's no job to go to? So education's really been a favorite of mine.
You know, that's interesting when you start looking at the research. What employers typically say is one of the biggest problems is having the right worker for the job that they have, and so having that skilled workforce is really critical for employment. Laws have unintended consequences. Nobody bats 1,000. So are there any laws that you've been involved with that passed that you're thinking in retrospect, maybe not so much?
My own, maybe one or two, and I thought I was working with the right people to make it happen, and it did, and then I was able the next year to come back and kind of revise my own bill, and that was who needed to be fingerprinted to be a volunteer at a high school in a coaching situation, and I guess inadvertently it included parents that wanted to volunteer as band volunteers, but in retrospect it wasn't that bad. I mean, nowadays, can you be too safe with your children at school? So, but we did come back, modify it a little bit. Sometimes in voting, it's really a worry to someone like me. I mean, I want to make sure if I'm putting my stamp of approval on something that I really understand it. But sometimes, and purposely so, I think, they make it so difficult for us to see. And then it's just like with the budget, I would say, there's a poison pill in there. And so there's two really good pieces of this trailer bill. And then, what the heck is this? It's almost like it's purposely done to challenge us.
Well, it's kind of, you don't want perfect to be the enemy of the good. So,
Right,
maybe you move 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but you still move 1 step forward. What about supermajority rules? You hear a lot about that. Some people say, listen, you're letting a small minority control the majority. We're a democracy after all.
Yeah.
Others say, no, you need that as a necessary check on majority overreach. What are your thoughts on supermajority votes and rules?
I think, balance in anything. I mean, we hear this all the time. We need life balance. We need nutritional balance. Well, we need legislative balance, I would say. I can't remember. What's the famous quote? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Mm-hmm. And it's been very interesting in this supermajority, superminority world. While my friends across the aisle would say, look how good we've been. We've been the supermajority, and we did not do split roll on Prop 13, and we didn't do all these evils. Well, truth be told, they really didn't have a supermajority until January of this year because of he's running for this, she's over there. So while on paper they had it, they didn't have people in the chair. So when we came back into session in January, finally the supermajority existed. And then I got a little help from the FBI and the Senate. So there's still this mythological supermajority doesn't really exist. But certainly there's enough votes there to dominate any type of legislation that we have.
Let me ask you this. We've got a minute left in the segment. I want to ask you about the whole thing of compromise. It seems like it used to be politics was the art of compromise. Now it's compromise is a dirty word. Eric Cantor recently had an experience with that.
Yes.
I mean, what are your thoughts about that? Should legislators be looking over their shoulders for fear if they compromise on something they're going to get voted out of office?
I think there's always fringe groups that want to control, whether that's far right or far left, and the rest of us that are in the middle are just kind of really. But I'm very hopeful, of course I'm always cautiously optimistic, that the extended term limits, even though it's a shorter time, it's extended, will help with that. I think back in the day, compromise was easier because exactly that. I mean, I'm one of those babies that had 6 years in the assembly. So you get here, you feel like you have to do something, you're constantly running for election, and you're always worried. I'm hopeful with extended term limits, people have more time to actually kick back, work with each other, and make really good decisions.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about how to improve legislative responsiveness and also root out political corruption. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with Connie Conway, a Republican from Tulare and the longest-serving Assembly Republican leader in the term limits era. So people often complain about corrupt politicians, and we've got some recent happenings in the state Senate that are giving them too many examples, frankly. Are some people just inherently greedy, or is there something about politics that invites corruption?
I think a lot of people believe that the influence of special interest groups lends itself to this unholy alliance between politics and perceived corruption or maybe real corruption. And it's something I've given a lot of thought to. I think if you have basic values, then you won't let yourself get drawn into that. But you do get comfortable in any situation. I think sometimes when people get too comfortable, they are more susceptible to maybe thoughts and suggestions that aren't that holy.
Shifting ethics or situational ethics. if it is kind of a personal thing, the failings of a few bad apples, is there anything we can do to stop it?
You know, I think the more transparent we are, the better. And I know, but it's always, it scares me on the other hand that the legislature sees a problem, real or perceived, and then they want to legislate it. So you're going to see lots of transparency bills. I know the Senate has just voted to forbid themselves from having contact with or fundraisers at given times of the year. But you know, part of me just believes, you know, if you're going to do that, you're going to do that. But if it looks better to people, if it makes it more a transparent process, I'm okay with it. I'm really okay with whatever makes sense. If you're right with yourself and you're an ethical person, then who cares?
So transparency might be a good thing.
I think. I'm for transparency in everything.
Let me transition a little bit and talk about just the size of the legislature. I don't think a lot of people understand that the California legislature has been the same size since 1879. The state has 40 times the population since then. And if you take a look at California legislators and you compare them to New York and Illinois legislators, you represent 3 times as many constituents. So it's a little counterintuitive, but should we be thinking about enlarging the California legislature?
Oh my gosh, I wonder how the general public would feel about that.
I'm not sure it would poll well, but
yeah, they think there's too many of us anyway. As long as the volume of work is met, for me, the most interesting thing about that amount of constituents, they try to balance it, but for me, I used to have 36,000 square miles, and if you're in downtown LA, it's probably 4 square miles, you know, but the amount of folks that you represent would be the same. And my real thoughts on that are, if it seems like there's too many of us, I think it's because the subject we talked about before, too many bills. If we had less legislation, I don't think it would feel like it's that big, and maybe it would even leave space to have more legislators.
Now here's a counter-argument. What about if we put the 2 houses together and had a unicameral legislature? I mean, at the federal level, we have, you know, representation by states at the Senate and then by population in the House. But in California, both the Senate and the Assembly are both by population. Isn't that redundant?
In some ways, it seems redundant, and I've had mixed emotions about that prior to coming here and now that I'm here. If anything, having the 2 houses, it kind of provides a check and balance, because for me, I have to get a bill out of a committee, I have to get it through appropriations, and I have to get it to the floor, and then maybe the Assembly votes on it, and then it goes over to the Senate, and it has to go through the same process over there. Now, some people say, yeah, that's just an excuse to kill things. But I'd like to err on the side of caution, so maybe it's good that we hear it, we go through the process, refine it, then it has to go through another process in the other house, and sometimes that's where good amendments happen, you know, in order to get it over there. So you rehear it and you see it. You'd like to think that if it passes out of both houses and it's been that thoroughly examined, that it would be thoroughly vetted, and yet the governor's job is to get rid of half of that stuff. So I don't know if I argued against myself there. I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, up next, we're going to talk about the future of the California Republican Party. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. It's recently been reported that if current trends continue, by 2024, registered Republicans will drop to 3rd behind Democrats and decline to state in California. What does our guest, Assembly Minority Leader Connie Conway, think is the way back for the California Republican Party? So what does the California Party have to do to reverse these trends?
You know, it's a question that we've asked ourselves for a few years, but in the past couple of years, we've really had we're on a mission, if you will, to speak for ourselves and define ourselves. And, you know, what does the party look like? What does it mean to be a Republican? You know, it's easy for others to define us. I've always felt I would like to define myself. And I think we have a new party chairman, not to speak disparagingly of other chairmen. They were all fine and did what they did.
Jim Brulte is...
Jim Brulte, our new chairman. It's very interesting as we do many, many things together. Senate Leader Huff, myself, and Mr. Brulte. You know, he used to have my job. He used to have Huff's job, and he's a larger-than-life character. So I really enjoy that. He leaves policy to us, and we're really trying to take the party in the direction that we think it's always been, but maybe we didn't articulate. Very inclusive. My candidates, I'm so proud of them. Even one of our candidates from our Fresno area, you know, we have a diverse group. We have a lot of women running. We have ethnic diversity in our candidates, and that's really the heart of the party. It's just our business to make sure people understand.
Well, what about a schism or a difference of opinion between the social conservatives and the fiscal conservatives? Can the Republican Party be both? Do they have to pick one?
I'm the kind of person that believes we don't have to pick one, but there's others that think we should, and if that happens, okay. I'm just a person that believes that we should talk about the basic values and issues that are important to people, and the social issues, look, I have my own personal beliefs. I'm not sure I want to lead with that if I'm in a political conversation. Those are very personal issues to me, but if you're talking about moving California forward economically, I'm not sure that we should spend majority of our time talking about social issues.
Well, let me ask you this. Is the California Republican Party currently too conservative or not conservative enough?
Half of the party would say we're too conservative, and honestly, I think it's really it's a half and half. I see it in my caucus every day, and the other half would say, you know, we're too moderate, or if I missed one of those, anyway, half and half. And it is a dilemma, and it is a caution. I always tell people I'm looking for reasonable, sensible adults that can have an adult conversation and agree to disagree, but still make progress forward. But that doesn't work for everybody. So the party is at a real crux. I mean, I think Senator Brulte stepped in at a time when we needed a different type of leadership, and he's filling that role for the future. Obviously, it remains to be seen. If it takes a complete schism, then it will happen.
You know, one of the things that's been talked about is voter fraud. Another thing that's been talked about is voter apathy. What's the bigger problem, and how do we address either or both?
You know, voter fraud, and I hear a lot about that from both sides of the aisle. I like to refer to it as voter integrity. The people that have the right to vote should be given that opportunity to do that. There are some in our society that don't have that opportunity. I think it's been forefront with the last couple of elections, but I really believe there were two things that added to that. First, it was redistricting, redrawing the lines, and so people would go to the wrong polling place, and they didn't know where they lived. And then with an open primary, it causes a lot of confusion. I guess I always want to believe that people are inherently want to do the right thing. There's always bad actors. We've just tried really hard to monitor the voting situation and make sure that it's all equal.
Well, let me ask this. Going to voter apathy, let's talk about that for a second. I mean, you know, a woman elected to Assembly Minority Leader, the Republican Party, do you think it's going to attract more women into politics?
I would hope so. Actually, it's interesting. We do look at these statistics if you're talking about women in politics. When I first got here, obviously about 20%, I think, of our caucus were women, and probably 28% on the Dem side. That has gone down, actually. We are smaller in the Republican Party, but we have a bigger plurality of women than the Democrats do. They lost a lot of women in the last election. And so, I think that speaks well for our party. And our diversity, actually is increasing too. So it's always a question. Look, women are 50% of the world. I always feel like they should have their fair share of representation.
I know some people would agree with you. So listen, we got 1 minute left in the segment, and I wanted to get this question in, and that is, if you were giving advice to young women or men who want to get involved in the legislative process, go into politics, what advice would you give them?
Well, I mean, one of my standard pieces of advice is don't fear change, because sometimes fear holds you back from making good decisions. But specifically to politics, I know for me it wasn't something I studied or thought about. I find young Californians a lot more politically interested than I think maybe they were at one time. But I would tell them, be open to conversation, do your homework, get your facts straight, and try to make the best learned decision that you can before you get involved or take a position on anything.
That's fantastic advice. Well, I want to thank Assembly Minority Leader Connie Conway for joining us. If you want to stay current with state and local politics, you can sign up for our award-winning e-newsletter, The Maddy Daily, by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. And now, another perspective.
California has seen a lot of political change over the years, from a solidly Republican state to a solidly Democratic one, from this and that and the other. But there's been one constant through all of that change, and that's been the kind of the constant politics of the San Joaquin Valley. Traditionally, the valley has provided the state, the legislature mostly, with kind of centrist, pragmatic politicians, people who were neither particularly far to the right or particularly far to the left. And it's endured regardless of party, the Democrats as well as Republicans. People such as certainly Ken Maddy, the man he replaced in the state Senate, George Zinovich, Gordon Duffy, Bob Monaghan, John Thurman, and many of other Valley legislators have all come out of that kind of centrist, pragmatic mold. And Connie Conway, who's now being forced out of the legislature by term limits, fits very well into that mold, coming out of local government, coming to Sacramento, eventually becoming Republican leader, and facing a unique set of circumstances in that during her time of leadership, Republicans not only lost the supermajority, or the Democrats, I should say, gained the supermajority in the Capitol, but Republicans lost some of their clout because of a ballot measure that reduced the vote on the state budget from a 2/3 vote to a simple majority vote. So she's been playing kind of with one hand tied behind her in recent years, but she's adapted to that. She's taken it with good humor, with balance, not get too excited about the whole thing, accepting the status of what it is, and hoping for the best to make what she could have out of the situation in which she found herself. And it's even possible in this year's elections that Republicans will pick up a few seats and once again gain more relevance in the Capitol. And if they do, and she's the Republican leader, she can claim credit for that. So good luck, Connie. You've earned it.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the Maddy Institute, the California Channel, Casey, or Valley PBS. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions shared in the Maddy Report, visit our website at valleypbs.org/Maddy. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.